Today's video is about budgeting. I know people don't like budgeting, but there's a couple things we got to talk about. Some things towards the end of this video you're probably not doing, even if you are budgeting, that are really important that catch most of us off guard every year or 2 years. So a few basic things. Write these things down on a piece of paper, and you can start with your, let's call it fixed expenses. Okay, you have something that's not going to change every month. That's probably going to be your rent, or it's going to be your mortgage, right? Maybe your car insurance, maybe your phone bill, things like that you would put in that category. So sit down, write those things down. You're welcome to pause this video at any time and follow this along, watch it through and rewatch it. But do that first. Next thing you want to do is start writing down some of those variable expenses, things that change kind of month to month, right? Utilities, that's one of them. It's a very important one, obviously, right? Your utility bills. Think of anything that is a variable expense that's changing month to month and write that down in a category. And I'll tell you what we're going to do with those in a second. Once you have those variable expenses, you can average those throughout the year to get a decent ballpark number to get you through a year, okay? So let's say utilities. Now this one can get a little weird because like where we live in California, okay, unfortunately, California, your bills can be pretty dramatic, okay? The summertime it gets really hot where we're at. Your bills can skyrocket and they go falling through the floor in the wintertime, right? Depending on if you're using gas or something for heating, or if you're using maybe wood burning for heating, that might be a little different. But you see these big bills go up and down. Those are a little harder to account for, but what you would generally do is take your total for the year that you spend on that type of stuff. We use PG&E, it's Pacific Gas and Electric. We can log on, look at that account, see what we paid for the whole year, divide that by 12, and boom, you got a number to go by for an average to get through a year. Do that with all your variable expenses, anything that changes through the year. Then you have things that I would call yearly expenses. They come once a year. A lot of people pay upfront for Amazon, or they pay upfront for Costco. Anything like that you pay once a year. Maybe renter's insurance. You pay once a year. You don't pay month to month. Maybe it depends on the insurance company you have, right? But those types of things, you want to write those things down, because there's a tip I want to give you, and it goes beyond 1 year. It might be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years for a very important expense most of us aren't keeping track of. So write some of these expenses down and we'll go from there. From here, we can total all of this up. Now we have our averages for our variable expenses. We have our normal expenses, the monthly ones that don't really change, right? We got all this stuff lined up. Now we can look at a total and say, okay, this is our monthly expense. Within those monthly expenses, some of those variables might have been food. They might have been gas, which could be harder to calculate, but you can generally ballpark these and get a decent idea. Maybe you budget over the next 2 months, right? Take that amount, see what you're spending at the grocery store, and times that by 12. Average those 2 months, times it by 12, and maybe it's very similar. Maybe you could do that for this year, try to budget, and then the next year you'll have a better budget because you'll be able to see what you spend. Now with this amount you have, you know what you need to have every single month to pay all these bills. See, that's not that hard to do. A good thing to do is put these down in a spreadsheet. If you have an Apple product, especially some of the newer Apple products within the last, 3 years, they have numbers on there and it has a standard budget. You can just click on it and type in your number. It'll show you your whole budget, a pie chart, everything there, you're good to go. But put that on some sort of Excel sheet. You're welcome to leave it on a piece of paper too. This is just a reference to here's what we're accounting for, what we think our expenses are going to be every single month. Now we're going to get into some of the tips and tricks, okay? You don't have to get as complicated as we do with some of this, but I find this to work well for my brain. Okay. Um, Generally, what you have, say you're operating an apartment complex. Okay. You have an operating account, or a business, you have an operating account. And then you have all these different categories that are budgeted. And each month you're spending throughout those categories. Accountants are, entering invoices, and then you have general ledger accountants that are moving these, reclassing these into different accounts where they're supposed to be. In each of those accounts, somebody budgeted. So they see the prior year we spent around $800 a month. They want to see if that changed throughout the year. Or maybe that month they look and they're wondering, how come we spent $2,000 this month? Can you explain that? Maybe it's in the wrong budget. Somebody put the invoice in the wrong budget, right? You're going to do something similar with your life. Here's what we do. So in my bank account, my wife has a separate checking account. I have a separate checking account. My check goes in there. Her check goes in hers. And what we did, we looked at our whole budget. We used pretty much her check to cover all the main fixed bills until we run out of that money. We apply it to everything that we can. My check, when it comes in, when it hits that checking account around the 30th of the month, I have about probably 19 savings accounts, okay, at my bank. And each one has one of those titles. One of it's cars, one's vacation. I have one for tithe. I have one for investments. For our son, we send him to coding and piano lessons, things like this. I want to budget for that, but I don't want to see that money in my checking account because it makes you think you have more than you have, right? But anyway, what I can do is set up in my bank account for all of these to draw a certain amount out every month into those accounts. Now, some of those you're going to move back into your checking to go pay all your bills, okay? Like we use a credit card for everything. We get points for it. Might as well get something free out of it, right? But we pay it off every single month. So we pay all of our bills on this card. And then at the end of the month, we see, okay, we owe X amount of money. I'll send my wife that money. She'll take her money together that's left because we aren't paying our rent on the credit card. We used to, and that was great. But they started charging a bunch of fees, so it's not worth it anymore. But anyway, the point is, I'll send her all that money. She'll wipe out the card. But the things that are left would be things like our vacation fund. We might put away $350 a month, comes out of my checking account, drops it into a vacation fund, and that's our budget for the year for vacations. It's all we're going to spend. We have, well, I say that's all we're going to spend. We go over that all the time, okay? But then I have an investment account, right? I can take money right off the top into that investment account, drop it in there, and those items can stay for a while. The investment one, I might send the money over to my stock account, or maybe I'm saving for some sort of other investment, right? But the point is, you're saving up that money for specific things that you plan on doing something in the future with, right? One of those categories I call is a yearly expense. So this has some important things in there. Not only your Costco and your Amazon, anything that you pay once a year, your renter's insurance or something like that. But what most people aren't putting in there is their registration for their vehicles. Okay, now you may laugh because I live in California when you hear this, but sometimes your registration, depending on how much you paid for your car, right? It could be $500 to $1,000 a year, maybe even more. Okay, so if you look at that from a monthly expense, let's say $1,200 for the year, just for easy math. Okay, you need to be taking out $100 a month and putting it into that yearly account. So when that bill finally comes, that money's already there. Most people aren't doing that, and you can go further than that. So our cars account, what we do, we take things like brakes, tires, oil changes, the transmission fluid, usually around 60,000 miles, you're getting something like that changed. Those main things, you are going to change your brakes. You know you're going to have to get new tires at some point. Now, you may not know how long they last. Call your tire company. Ask them how much they are. Let's say they're $1,200. You know if they last 48 months, right? Divide that $1,200 by 48 months and start dropping that into that account every single month. And you could put it together with a couple things so you don't have a bunch of these individual transactions coming in. You might do like, okay, I know my tires are $12.10 a month for the next 48 months. You can call a company to do your brakes, get an estimate on the type of car you have. And let's say it's $800, but maybe you get 70,000 miles out of these brakes, right? So if that's the case, do the same type of thing. Maybe it takes you, maybe you only drive 10,000 miles a year, right? Well, that's 7 years before you have to get those brakes done. So you can take that same amount, divide that up over 7 years, and start throwing it in that account. So take your total for that car fund, and maybe it's $350 a month you're dropping in that car fund to replace these things in the future. Most people aren't doing that, but it's saved us so many times. Anytime something comes up, all of a sudden we need new tires, especially if you have an all-wheel drive car, right? One of our cars are all-wheel drive. One tire goes bad, you got to replace them all, right? But since we're budgeting for that, when it comes due, we got the money for it. It's not a big deal, right? These are important things most of us aren't thinking about. All of a sudden you come up with a $1,200, tire bill. You got to change your brakes. They all end up happening at once, right? You got to get this oil change, and you don't have time to do it yourself. So you got to drop it off somewhere, go to work, come back and get your car, all these things, and you end up throwing them on a credit card. And you throw them on a credit card that you're not planning on paying off because you never budgeted for it. Those are a couple tips that I think are really helpful. They've helped us out a lot. You don't have to get too complicated with it. Some people might just want to do an operating account and keep it on a spreadsheet. I like to break mine out into separate savings accounts. Keeps it really easy on my mind. I can pop in my bank account at any time and see, hey, how much do we have in the car fund? Or how much do we have in our son's fund? Or how much do we have in the investment account? I want to move some over, right? It makes your life a lot easier. So find out with your bank, can you have a bunch of savings accounts that are free to have, right? Can you log in and have automatic distributions or transfers, I might call it at your bank, go into those accounts? How do you set those up? That's how you make your life easier with budgeting, but it all starts with making a budget to begin with.